Hello, this is Ralph Brandt from the Fireside. I'm going to preface this by saying I have no concrete magic information source, but I have watched several tens of hours of the House hearings, of video from Butler, PA, just a little bit of everything, including a couple of conspiracy theories that are crazy enough that anybody believes them. Well, I usually start those, take a look until I see one big hole, and then when I see the first big hole, I turn them off. There's too much going on here. But the first thing that I want to say is this. We as a nation dodged a bullet. I do not care, for the purposes of what I'm going to be talking about, I do not care if the man on that stage who was shot at, or woman, was Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or Kamala Harris. We dodged a bullet as a country. With the polarization of the country right now, I fear that had that bullet taken out Trump, we would now be in a shooting civil war. We would at least have significant things going on. Don't you go AR-15 mania on me. If that had been Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, and the bullet had gone through the head, not through the ear, we would now be seeing the most destructive devastation in the streets. You see, the right and the left would have handled this in two different ways. And unfortunately, I have a feeling the right would have handled it a little better. We would have had a few crazies who would have taken to shooting a few things. But we would have wholesale burning down of cities if it had been the left. If it had been Kamala or Joe, we would have cities burning down all over the place. And if you think that I'm wrong, let's take a look back a couple years ago when the Honorable George Floyd and the Honorable Freddie Gray were killed and cities burned. Not just the city that it happened in, but other cities. Now, admittedly, the whole city didn't burn down, but there were mass burnings. If this had been Kamala or Joe, and the assassin had been successful, I fear for what would have had to happen. I guess I'm going to be a little perverse and say, I wonder if it had been Kamala, if she would have been out looking for bail money for people when cities were burning. But I've also looked at this in a few other ways. And like I said, I've been watching congressional hearings. And to be honest with you, I got a pretty good BS detector. A lot of times I can pretty well tell you if the person's blowing smoke or if they're somewhat shooting straight. I'm going to rate a few people. If the head of the Secret Service, who has now resigned, told me the sun was coming up tomorrow morning, I'd worry. I don't think anything that came out of her mouth had any value. Not only did it not have any value, she didn't tell us anything. She sat in that seat and avoided divulging anything. I don't have a timeline on it. It's not our policy to do this. She is in front of the House committee that oversees the Homeland Security, of which the Secret Service is a part of. If she had said that has to be done in a skiff or in a confidential thing, I can't tell you out here, maybe I'd have bought that. But not the number of it She spent 4 or 5 hours there. I know I watched 3 of it, and finally my stomach got upset far enough that I would have had to puke if I'd watched much more. As bad as that was, the only thing that could come out of most of the Democrats' mouth was AK-47, or I'm sorry, AR-15. I don't think there was a one of them that missed a discussion on the AR-15. Well, there are at least 50 other rifles that would do that. And quite frankly, I could have done a better job with my dad's 30-06 hunting rifle, because that rifle is not the most accurate thing. Secondly, it has a bullet that's quite a bit heavier and at least the same velocity. You hit something with it, it's going down. Okay? My dad hunted deer with it. By the way, that rifle is almost identical, except that it's not semi-automatic. It was a Remington pump, fired the same ammunition as the M1 that was used to eliminate Germans and Japanese and Italians during World War II. Very effective weapon. I could have gotten off 3 shots before they got me, but I could have gotten off 3 shots that had a higher percentage of hits because I was using a better weapon, even though I couldn't pump the rounds out as fast. By the way, that's one of the things that the anti-AR-15, anti-large magazines, anti-bump stock people do not realize. A good sniper doesn't need 8 rounds, or 15 rounds, or 50 rounds. A good sniper needs 1 round and takes it out. You don't need the other rounds. And to be honest with you, the bump stock, which is one of the big bugaboos, I don't think you could hit the side of a barn door after the second shot with that. I mean, it's just that simple. And if you look at where the people were who were shot, the other 3, his accuracy was miserable. There's a conspiracy out there that this was a Republican plot to shoot Trump and hit him in the ear and make it look good so that people would have sympathy, more people would vote for him. Anybody who even tenders that idea is as crazy as a loon. There is no way I would allow the best sniper that the U.S. Army has to shoot at me and try to miss me by less than a foot at 400 yards or at 400 feet. Okay? I wouldn't even allow him to do it at 50 feet. The risk is too high. There is no way. It flunks everything that makes any sense. There are a couple of other conspiracies. There is a second shooter. There were 8 rounds fired by him, and 2, I believe it is, from the people who ended him. There were 8 spent cartridges on the roof where he was at. Now, admittedly, 3 of them could have been placed there before or whatever. But my understanding is that the markings on the back of the cartridge, and by the way, they're unique, indicate that they were all fired from the same rifle. Now, you fire one more with his rifle, you look at the cartridge, and the back of it will have marks. No matter how good machining is, there's always what I'm going to call scratches in the metal that will imprint on the firing pin or on the center of the cartridge that gets hit by the firing pin. There would have to be some proof that those cartridges came from somewhere else. Admittedly, he could have taken empties up and dropped them there. Yes. But the audio sounds the same if the rifle that fired the other shots had been somewhere else, the audio would not be of the same level and sound the same. Just too many things. So how did it happen? How did we get within inches of a disaster? I'm going to talk about a couple of things. First thing is a subject that a lot of people don't even want to touch. It's called DEI, diversity, equity, and I forgot what the other one is. But basically, it is discrimination. When you start to say, we will pick the 5 best people with green hair, as opposed to the 5 best people. I do not care what definition you replace green hair with. You are watering down your team. You're watering it down. When I was hiring people, I didn't look at the color, didn't look at the gender. I didn't look at what their religion was. I didn't look at what their sexual orientation was. Heck, at that time, we weren't even thinking about that. What I looked at was, did this person look like they could do the job based on questions I asked about their background, their abilities, and in some cases, technical questions that I knew the answer to that they should. When I was interviewing for COBOL programmers, I would always ask one question: what's a 66 level? I'll bet you 95% of COBOL programmers had never used a 66 and didn't know what it was. And I would get very few answers on it. And I could pretty well tell how deep the person had gotten into COBOL with that question. Now, I would not reject them if they flunked out on that question if the other question answers were solid and definitive. But I had a couple of questions that delved into the depth, and I found a few people here and there, and uniformly, the ones that answered those very difficult questions correctly turned out to be some of the best employees. Just a matter of asking the right questions. I had one guy who told me he knew how to screw, bad word, but how to screw over customers. The other interviewers overrode me and we hired him. I'll tell you a funny story about that. We fired him about 3 years later for his lack of ability to get along with people. Wonder why. I saw that in him. And it was funny because I didn't ask him a question about that. I come into the room late, and I was almost never late for interviews. That was one of those things. I was there early. I come in late, and I apologized, saying I had a customer on the phone, and he just wouldn't listen to, I need to hang up. I'll get back to you. And that's when he said, well, I know how to screw those guys over. Oops. And he basically flunked the interview on the first question that I didn't ask. I wanted that best person for the job. Now, I will tell you, in promotions, sometimes I did not take necessarily the best person, but the one who looked like they would grow fast into the job. And that was based on how they learned, where they were at, because usually I knew them, or at least knew about them. DEI violates that totally. On DEI, that person has to have green hair, or you can't hire them. They have to meet a criteria that is a false criterion. And quite frankly, the Secret Service, and by the way, the FBI, and most of the rest of the federal government, is accumulating drones like this. And I will use the word drone, not in the sense of the aircraft that flies around, unmanned aircraft, but in the sense of the honeybee, where there are people who eat the honey but contribute nothing to the hive. And these are people who collect a check, absorb our tax money, and contribute nothing to the federal government or the state government if that's being done there, or the local. And by the way, I spent 14 years with the state government, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I met a lot of really good people while I was there. But unfortunately, a less than 80% contingent of those are doing the bulk of the work. The other 20%, maybe as much as 30, are contributing nothing. They are like the one guy said about a college student. College president called a guy and he says, "Your son is taking up space." He said, "Oh, he's becoming an astronaut." He said, "No, he's taking up space." And many of them are taking up space. Let's go on to something else. The Secret Service has fallen victim to the cell phone and the text message. One of the reasons that the guys on the roof did not spot the guy is that they were looking at the cell phone, because their information was being sent to them not through a radio that they could listen to and still watch. It was being sent to them through cell phones. And they had to look at the cell phone for text. Or if the person called them with voice, they had to talk to them. In a tactical situation, there is not time to dial a cell phone or watch it. We do not allow people, well, we're changing it, but we typically don't want people using cell phones while they're driving, because it distracts them from what they should be doing. A sniper slash spotter on the roof needs to be looking around, not looking at a cell phone. And let's face it, that's what was going on that day. I am not sure that FirstNet, which the government has spent a lot of money on, has not been a bad thing. It's a parallel cellular network that provides bandwidth so that when things turn to crap, the first responders can still use the phone. And that's a good idea. But unfortunately, they're moving away from that, away from the radios and going to using the cell phone. I do public service events like serving for the MS rides. And we do what are called SAGs, support and gear. I'm in my car. I got a radio. I got a navigator because I get lost. Without a navigator, I get lost. It's usually she, by the way. And it's one gal who's I've been with quite a bit, Kathy, who is awesome. But we ride the course, watching for bikers who are in trouble, things like that, help them out. We usually carry a few bottles of water. I have enough tools that if somebody just needs a bolt tightened, I can do it. I have a bike rack on the back, and the back seat will fit 3 people. If somebody can't make it, we pick them up, we put them in the car, we put the bike on the back, and we take them somewhere. But we use radio, not cell phones. And the reason we use radio is because I'm in one SAG, there's 4 other SAGs usually. There's 4 or 5 rest stops. All of them have a radio operator, plus a net control, keep us on track. And somebody at the race or the ride leadership, so that we can, if we got a problem, we can pass it back. We can call for help, whatever. The ability to tell everybody on the course, this is going on, is critical. We had a gal go over the handlebars. Her husband, she was riding with a group of gals that were wives to a group of husbands that were riding together. And you know how the guys are, we get Get out there and move. She goes over to handlebars. The girls call race headquarters on a cell phone, and race headquarters has the radio operator right next to them. And we get a call on the radio. Find the guy who is bib number 201, and I know it was 201. It isn't like 30 seconds, and one of the other SAGs comes back and says, I think we just passed him a couple minutes ago. They make a flip going the other way, they catch him. Within about 3 or 4 minutes, we have him. How long would it have taken to notify 5 SAGs out there by telephone? Think about it. That's number one. I know about it. I'm on an early part of the course that's dead. Course is dead. I'm pulling down signs because we have to pull all of our signs. The ones that route the thing. I'm pulling signs. I don't matter. I can pull signs later. I call in as soon as the information clears. I call in and said, hey, Sandy, I'm just pulling net control. I'm just pulling signs. She said, oh, good. Can you go down to this rest stop, pick up the husband, and bring him back to start finish? That way, the other SAG who is working that area does not have to go off their course. Now, the alternative could have been that I'd have gone down and replaced him, but there was a good reason to not do that. Okay? So we took him in. In a few minutes, we had resolved the whole situation, but only because everybody could communicate. What if on that day, the local police who knew something was going on could have communicated directly with the snipers? And by the way, they sent a picture of him, but that picture was sent a long time before. And when they realized he was on the roof getting ready to fire, and by the way, there is a new video that comes out that shows the local police trying to get on the roof. And they did try to notify the Secret Service, and the message did not get through. The other thing that we do, and I do search and rescue, and we will have sometimes 3 or even 4 units with disparate radios. We can't talk to each other. We have one site, it's called Command, and every radio system on the event, the search, every radio system is represented there. If something happens, and there's like 2 or 3 of us listening to these, if something happens on the one system that needs to go to the other, we pick up a mic and pass it on. That did not happen at Butler. One of the most damning things at Butler is the fact that there was no pre-event briefing done. The local police, and in particular the local sharpshooters that were in that building, had not been briefed. There's something done wrong there. In addition, that building was within the range of an AR-15. By the way, the range of an AK-47 is 200 yards further. There was no briefing. There was no putting the heads together and make sure everybody's on the same page. We do that routinely when we do an event. We do that routinely when we do a search. It is inconceivable to me that an organization like the Secret Service would not do a briefing. It just blows my mind, the number of holes. The fact that that roof was not clearly visible to any sniper. I think it was 500 feet. And because of the way the roof laid, the sniper could not have seen him until he got his head up to fire. And here's where another place where DEI comes in. When the shots were fired, Trump dropped on his own, by the way. I think he knew that the podium was somewhat of a, at least concealment, if not bulletproof. It's hard to hit somebody when you can't see them. He dropped. And then they brought around him what the Secret Service calls a body bunker. And what's a body bunker? It's a group of bodies that are big enough to protect him. Watch the video. There's a 5'7" gal behind him. How is a 5'7" person, and I'm a 5'7", there's no way in the world I could body bunker a 6'2" guy. I don't know if he's 6'2", but he's got to be close. How could I body bunker them? She's standing there like, now what do I do? If she was protecting, Trump's wife is tall. Obama's wife, Michelle, is tall. She could have body bunkered Beth Truman, who was about 5'4". I doubt if she could have body bunkered Laura Bush, or her mother-in-law, lost her name. She could have probably she would have had trouble body bunkering most of those. I have no problem with a 5'7" female Secret Service person unless they're put in a position where they should not be. And that's what DEI does. Somewhere along the line, we need to quit worrying about ethnicity, about color. Somewhere along the line, common sense has to prevail. And I'm going to be very frank with you. Minorities that have been disadvantaged need to be helped. But I'm going to tell you something. $1 million check for reparations is a joke. And I can prove that. I can prove it. Look at the number of people who have won $1 million to $3 million in a lottery, who were, I won't say minorities, who did not have that kind of money. If you look at them, most of them are bankrupt in 3 years. They spend without realizing that the money will end. I do not think $1 million, even if it was morally right, and it's not, by the way, but even if it was morally right, $1 million reparations payment would not help. Most would squander it, and they and the family would be no better off, because $1 million can't get you more than about $80,000 a year without you eating into the principal. If you invest it well, you have almost a solid $80,000 cash stream every year. And then the government is going to take about it's about $10,000 of that. So you got 70 left. So at $72,000, you got $6,000 a month to spend. Okay? You spend more than $6,000 a month, you're going in the hole. And most of the people who wind up with those kind of things do not understand finances. They do not understand taxes, and they don't hire somebody. And you don't have to hire a person. What you need to do is get a counselor that's going to spend a few hours with you and get things together. And maybe they spend a few hours every 6 months, but it doesn't cost you that much. That's what reparations do. What is needed, and I'm going to say this, is number one, restoration of the family. Most of the problems for the minority community have been caused since 1964 and Lyndon Johnson's Great Society and War on Poverty. it made it economically feasible and economically attractive for there to be no father in the home. And things just went downhill from there. We have fostered all kinds of idiocy. That's where we need to fix it. I forget who the black leader was back in the 70s who said they need to get the needle out of their arm and their nose in a book. Well, today it's probably a computer screen to learn, but let's not worry about the method or the mode. Let's worry about doing it. A lot of this would not happen. DEI is not the cure. DEI is another disease. And that disease we now can take a look at has nearly killed an ex-president. DEI is now eroding the caliber of the commercial airline pilots. In 2000, I was not afraid to get on an airplane. I got on, in a little over a year, 4 planes a week. I did not have fear. Today, you won't have to put a gun to my head to get me on a plane, but I'm going to have to do some thinking about it. DEI is eroding the capabilities of the air traffic control because they have reduced the requirements for that. When you get points for being a minority, you're eroding it because that is not a contribution to you being better. Now, I don't care if we have to spend a little more money to train that person. I don't care. But I want the competence level to be there. I fear that DEI is eroding the competence of our medical community. I haven't been able to prove that yet. But this is what brought us here. The second thing is the old bureaucratic circle the wagons, don't tell anybody, and don't fix any problems. The only way that you learn from an incident is when you ask the hard questions of everybody involved. That's something I did for years. I was considered one of the best at it at Caterpillar, was taking a look at what went wrong and coming up with what we needed. And by the way, a few times I had to point the finger at me. Maybe I wasn't the only one responsible, but I had some responsibility in it. And one of the reasons that I was respected in that was because a few times I did point the finger at me. Wasn't easy, wasn't fun. But if we're going to learn, we're going to need to do that. There are a couple things that need to be done right now. Number one is absolute ability hiring. No DEI. If somebody's there and they're not the best, don't fire them. Get them training. I believe in the old Exxon thing. Reorient, retrain, and then replace. If the reorientation and the retraining doesn't work. But I don't believe in firing a person unless you cannot rehabilitate them. I don't care what color they are. But we need to get to a place where accountability is there. I did not know until this happened. The Secret Service is under what is probably the worst cabinet official in the Biden government. It's under Department of Homeland Security, Mr. Mayorkas. No wonder it's going astray. The border's a mess. Everything he's doing looks like a mess. He was going to put in a censorship group. Somewhere there has to be accountability. And we're going to have to see how to get it. I'm not real hopeful that the House and Senate are going to do it. But my prayer is that some heads roll. You see, although I'm not for firing, at the top level, a fish rots from the head. And many of these organizations in the government are rotten from the head. This is Ralph Brandt from the Fireside.